But it's the grace of God that holds back his wrath. And that's because Christ satisfied God the Father with his payment. God is so good, and not just to us, but especially to us.
You are always only good.
All right, question number one for our panel. 3 new believers desire to be baptized. The church tank that requires climbing down with stairs has no railing and descends down into the tank. New believer 1 is 83, with severe physical limitations, who's not able to be stable and can't climb down the stairs. New believer 2 is 73. She nearly drowned as a child and has debilitating hydrophobia. New believer 3 is 61. She's a larger woman with severe vertigo and unstable legs, and she won't fit into the tank and can't do the stairs. All 3 believers are desiring baptism and eager to join the body. What do I do? Is there ever a case for alternative modes of baptism? What do other churches do in this scenario?
I'll give you a situation that I did. That a good friend of mine who I met through Little League sports, his dad was dying of cancer, and he asked me to go witness to him. This guy was not a member of our church, but member of another church, and he's the pastor. And I got his. So anyway, I went out and visited with him several times. And this man truly comes to Christ in his home, and he's wired up. I mean, he's got multiple wires everywhere. Okay, you with me? And if you'd have known his life and known his profession of faith, and he looked at me, he said, I want you to baptize me before I die. I want this. Well, if we put him in the tank, both of us would have been gone on to heaven, because he could not be disconnected. And so I went to our deacons and we talked, and he wasn't going to join our church. I mean, so then you got a theology issue. Usually baptism goes lead to church membership, but we talked it through, and we had at his home over his bathtub, we had a pouring of just his head, because that's all could get wet. Okay, so that was a exception to a man that, I mean, but if you'd have known this man before and known him after he got saved, and if you could have heard his desire to be baptized, you try to do all you can to encourage. But, you know, there's also these portable baptistries that are very popular that may not cause the hindrance of walking up and walking down. You know, so there are ways to do it. Okay, and we've even done practice runs, you know, for those that you say, well, why do it? Because somebody's fear of the water, and they need to make sure water's not going up their nose. Okay, so you can do that. But that's my experience. I mean, but if that's a real case, praise the Lord they've been saved, you know.
Question number 2, as a pastor, how do you approach another pastor who needs to retire but doesn't see the need himself?
But then you're both within the same church or a different church?
How about both?
You're the pastor guru.
I've been meaning to talk to you, Marsh.
I'm retired.
I mean, it would be really delicate. If you had even one of your best friends, it'd be a very delicate thing. And it might, I always think of about really important advice like that within a local church. should come from the leading layman in the church. And I'll advise pastors when they're trying to figure out their future, if they really know they can trust the leading layman in the church. He may be a current deacon, he may have been a chairman, he may have rolled off for some reason, he's not active, but he's actually the guy everyone would look to naturally if there were not a pastor for leadership, lay leadership. And I think hopefully those two people, the pastor and that man, have that type of relationship, a trusting relationship where that gentleman could say, Pastor, just kind of gently walk into it. And what I have noticed over the years is it is almost universal that a church will decline if a pastor does not get out early enough. It will decline in various ways. It'll likely decline numerically. There might be one or two exceptions to that and I'm not even sure those are exceptions, but it's just a universal thing. It's just the life cycle of a man, the life cycle of a church. So it is normally to the good future of that church that a man not hang on till the thing is really in trouble. So, but I think there's a way to tell a man how, really be kind and complimentary, but just say, that we're starting to think the time is coming, so we just want to urge you to pray about that. And, a wise man will get that hint. He'll get it. So, and if it's your friend, you just find a way to do that in a kind way, best you can. So, even with the best of friends, though, there's things like that I would not want to spoil a lifetime friendship on a negative note like that. So I think I'm not sure it should be friend to friend, in those circumstances.
How can a pastor be a better encouragement to his wife when she is physically weary?
There's a rule my wife and I established a long time ago. Is when actually it came from me as I started seminary, because I owned a business with my dad. We had at that time 4 children. I looked at my work schedule, looked at the schedule at seminary, and I figured literally I had 15 minutes a day I could spend and talk to her. So we established a thing right after dinner, send the kids out of the room. I mean, there had to be blood dripping before they interrupted us. And we established a 15-minute talk time every day. And I think that's preventive medicine. If your wife is weary, I would say then you got to say, okay, what can go? There are negotiables and there are non-negotiables. And if she can get rid of any of the responsibilities within the church, I would make sure that goes. But also we know there's seasons of just being overwhelmed. There are. And so I would find, again, another pastor's wife who could talk to her and just to see what can be taken off her plate. Or maybe there could be a spiritual problem. I mean, our wives carry offenses for us when people come after us. They do. And we need to make sure bitterness is not built up. I mean, so it could be a spiritual problem, but it could be just overwhelmed with responsibilities. And there's a lot of demands on the pastor's wife. But I would, there are many godly, in fact, a lot of your wives, I know several of them, they could be that person for them to call. There's also a new group that started. It's called Selah Ministries. It's a counseling group only for ministry people. Okay, they're really based out of a church in South Carolina, Grace Baptist Church of West Columbia, South Carolina. It started by a missionary who he and his wife got burned out in the field, and they came home and got counseling, and so they started this ministry. And it's only, so they have I think all the counselors are ACBC certified. So there's that level of competency, if you want to say that. But it's all local church stuff. And so that group is there if somebody wants to reach out. But that's where I would start. Bruce, you want to?
Question number 4. Many pastors here are from small churches that have difficulty even paying their pastor, let alone assisting in retirement and future financial security. Many here don't own a home to sell or even have a retirement fund. What can we do to address this issue?
And I just want to say, if a person, and there are many pastors that are bivocational, that are living in very, very sacrificial circumstances, and at the end of the day, if you're doing what you know God wants you to do, that is then between you and the Lord, and the way you want to navigate that and trust the Lord. It's just good to know the basics of what's involved. Somebody's going to have to pay those bills at the end of life. So there's someone going to have to cover that. Is that going to be the government? Is that going to be the family? Where's that going to be? And I think the Bible's clear that a man has to take care of his own family. 1 Timothy 5:8 has to find a way to meet the needs. It doesn't mean you have to have a retirement program. It's just whatever that means. So I would do my best. My ministries have been bivocational ministries. I had a full-time job at BJ. I'm serving in a local church at a very small salary, if you could even really call it that. Just like almost like low honorarium, that kind of thing. But it was all very rewarding for me. But I did have income, I did have medical benefits, etc. So, Marsh and I talked about this a little bit earlier privately. I think my advice would be to get the kind of regular job that would provide for the needs of the family. And if you're the kind of person who's got the energy to do it, then do your other ministry, your church ministry. I hate to say on the side, because it's really not that way. It's really your preoccupation. But have the regular income, hopefully the benefits in the future, and do both. My father-in-law was bivocational for his entire ministry until he retired from school ministry, from being involved in teaching school, and then he could be full-time with the church then. But that was 41 years into his 61 years. But he provided a good livelihood for his wife and his 4 children. He provided a very nice retirement for his widow, who still lives on that at the age of 93. And so he took care of all the responsibilities in life and was very, very faithful to the local church ministry God called him to. So I just say there is a way, and I would say not to have everything you want, but there's a way to provide what is needed. And sometimes a good financial advisor that understands ministry can provide a lot of insight about that.
Yeah, and I would say we live by faith as pastors, and there may be, in all aspects. We went out as church planting missionaries, and we were on missionary support for 3 years. I was in the business world before that, so there was some benefits to that. But I do know there are faithful men that do serve sacrificially in small churches that there's not a retirement. And there are some, I'm not sure, I have to get the names for you, but I know there are some places, I know there's one in Florida that have small homes that, you could, if you never had a parsonage, if you always lived in a parsonage, that you could rent there at a very small price. They're funded through some Christian business people. I think there may be one in Indiana. I can find those if somebody. Pardon me? Missouri. Okay. So there's several of these around. That and again, like Bruce said, if you're conscious, you did all you could do. Okay. But there's still bills that have to be paid. My mom's 94, and I sit down, once every 3 months, we go through her finances, okay? She's lived in the same house since 1957. Very frugal, but it's amazing how much it costs just to have a 94-year-old mother. And she's on Medicare, Social Security, but just life. She broke a tooth last week, and oral surgeons don't operate for free. You know, I mean, so this is reality. But I do know, we have one interim, very faithful, and his daughter and son-in-law said, we want to convert our basement for a mother-in-law suite because we want you to come live with us, and you can go do ministry until you can't do that anymore, and you'll live with us until you're finished. So that's family rising up. Bruce mentioned that. That was one way. But I'm just, as Bruce walking through with his, both with his mom, I'm walking through with mine. Bills are bills, and they're going to come. And, you know, if you're opted out of Social Security, then it is going, you got to find some way to make it happen. If you're young and you're a pastor, you know, I know we have at least one pastor in here bivocational. And there was one pastor, one church I went to help, and their pastor was so good he could get his bivocational job done. They'd been doing it for 20 years. And I said, there's no reason for him not to stay bivocational, because he was, you know, he'd gotten so good at his job he could keep it going. And that took a less burden off the church and helped provide for his, so he would be able to retire when it was time. But, you know, but there's some very good financial advisors. Bruce and I know one. He's on the GFA board that would not in any way try to sell you a product. I know he's guided many missionaries. You know, missionaries coming home, what do they do with a house? They don't, you know, do they buy a house here? Anyway, but there are some godly men that are very wise that probably help navigate some of that. But the point is, all of our life is by faith. If you've done the best you can do, you've got a clear conscience before God. And that's where you stand. And you plant your flag of faith right there. Okay.
How do I challenge non-members to become members? They're active, supportive, and love the Lord, but are just not willing to take the step of membership.
I think we may have had some of this discussion, so it's open for your input as well. In my world, okay, there have been two reasons good people love your church, love this, you know, that they don't end up joining. And number one is alcohol. They want to social drink. I'm not saying they're drunks. They would say, you would know, I've never been drunk, but I don't see anything wrong with, you know, with social drinking. Or having a beer while I'm cooking hamburgers, or, you know, you fill in that blank. But they have no problem with light use of alcohol. And the second would be not that we ask people to tithe, but they don't want to sacrificially, financially support the church. Now, there's normally a reason that people don't want to join, okay? And how far you go with that, that's the reason I am a firm proponent of some kind of intro class in the beginning. You know, there are several books. Bruce mentioned one, More Than Spectators by Paul Downey. Tom Rayner wrote a good little book called I Am a Church Member, which we would give to every person in the intro class, you know. And there are other materials you can use. But then I also, if they want to do things in the church, and let's say, so what can they do biblically, and what can't they do? Well, you got some legal things maybe they can't do. So Brotherhood Mutual and Church Mutual are two good insurance companies, and they may say you cannot let a non-member work in your nursery. You should not, you know. So you got the biblical side also. You may have some legal things to deal with. And I'm not a lawyer, but Brotherhood Mutual, Church Mutual has some great resources you to do. But, you know, to tell somebody they really just can't come to church unless it's a church discipline situation, that's hard. And all you can do is try to address, make sure you ask, what is it? Because usually there's, oh, maybe, I think, what did you say? Some
Yeah.
burned in the past?
Well, like if you have someone come to your church and your doctrinal position is very well defined on a lot of particulars, but for some reason in their background, they have a reservation and they actually can't, in their own mind or heart, they can't say, I believe that. Now, it depends on what it is, and it depends on how strongly you view that people have to understand and agree with every last thing in your, say, your constitution or your doctrinal statement. But I think personally, I think there's a place. It'd be a rare exception for you get down and you find out the thing is really not that significant doctrinally or practically, and you just say, okay, we just want you to understand that this is what we teach. So we would not allow any teaching otherwise, and we would not want anyone to be disruptive about that or create an undercurrent. However, you can find a nice way to say it. And perhaps you could let them join if you had that understanding with them. And I would say it'd be a minor thing, not a major thing. It certainly wouldn't be a essential of the faith, but it would be a more minor interpretational matter. That'd be just my opinion. So,
Mark, you just touched on this, Marsh, but the next question is, how do I determine what areas of service non-members are allowed or not allowed to participate in?
Yeah, and my first call will be to the insurance company, and then with the deacons to determine, especially as it gets into music, can they do specials, can they play the piano? You got a whole list of things, and you just got to figure out where your church is, because a lot of that is not in Scripture, of just wisdom in dealing with that. Yeah.
How do I proceed with church discipline if a member resigns church membership just prior to being voted out of membership? Should that vote continue on?
All right, I can tell you my experience, okay, and this is just us. Number one, church, I prefer to call it restoration. Okay, we're trying to restore this person. I think it's a 4-step process, okay? And I immediately go to chairman of the deacons, number one, and then we visit, okay, and then we tell it to the church for prayer. So I just want to, before you then bring it to the church for a vote, okay? So whatever process in that, I always tell the chairman of the deacons immediately this is what's happened. So there's documentation of when it started, okay? I say that because then, so we had this case come up. So can you discipline someone out of the church that has withdrawn their membership? Okay. So I saw, so you got, okay, so biblically, what do you do? All right, so legally, what do you do? So we sought advice. And I think this came from CLA, like one of the groups, that church membership is volunteer. The church does vote on it. Okay, so someone can withdraw their membership. But it doesn't mean you have to grant withdrawal as a member in good standing. Okay. So what we did is, okay, you have withdrawn. We will inform the church, but it will be in the minutes, public minutes, that you withdrew as a member not in good standing in the process of church discipline. So it's documented, and if ever the chairman of the deacons knows when it started, if it's just step 2 or whatever, but we put it in the church minutes, and everyone in the church knew that's what happened. And personally, when we make that announcement, I record it, and I tell the person, whoever that is, I'd like you to have a copy so you know exactly what we said and what we didn't say. And usually that helps soften something, even maybe to the point where they're open back to you. But that's just what we do. Okay, and I think that you can seek advice from others, and there may be a better way to do it. But that, that's, you got any?
Maybe the difference would be, should there be a difference in behavior between the first century church and today with a 501c3 and governmental leadership that are quite different. So how do we act maybe like a first century church with that church discipline that didn't have the boundaries that we may have in the United States of America?
I would just modify that just a tad. You might, if you didn't want to go all the way to say we're considering you not in good standing, it's almost saying we're saying you're guilty, but I still think that's okay in general.
And
but
we do go further.
yeah,
And leaving the church not in good standing because of unreconciled issues within the church.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
There you go. So if you just leave it like that, so if you said, even if you just said it informally, we are informing you that this, it'd be good to have regular, I don't know if you do this or not, but some churches will at the quarterly meeting or monthly meeting say these people are no longer, they've withdrawn their membership, just as a routine thing. These people have joined, these people are no longer members. So that would make it a routine matter of business, and then you could just, you could say, we need to let you know that disciplinary process had begun and these folks have withdrawn their membership during a disciplinary process. So you're not making a judgment about if they're guilty, you're just saying factually this is what they did.
But they are unrepentant. I do put that.
You put that, okay,
Yes.
yeah. And it might depend on the circumstance, but yeah. So, no, I think at that point, you've in essence, you've accomplished, if it were going to go all the way to disciplining them out of the church, they have removed themselves. So in a practical sense, it has happened, right? So I don't think you're in breach of the Bible by doing that personally.
When can a new pastor make changes to philosophy of ministry or even the church constitution?
All right, this is my advice as of, what time is it? 8:33 on Tuesday evening. This could change. I love to talk this topic with pastors that take churches. Okay, so what I'm telling you is, I mean, I replanted a church, so I didn't have to deal with any of this when there were 5 people left, so they didn't care what we did. All right, so, and that's a true statement. All right, I'm not just making that. All right, so as I talk to pastors of that exact thing, here's a general consensus of what they have gathered. You need to do all your homework up front. Usually the issues are polity, music, translations. Those and the, pardon me? And well, I mean, why do you want to bring that up? But I'm talking where people have a church culture, because every church has a culture. Where people get upset is when that culture's changed. Now, you can get into altar calls, and you get, you should work through that as you're interviewing and as you're preaching. But where there's going to be a change, and I would even say, you're there on a Wednesday night, and you prefer to be business casual on a Wednesday night and teach from the floor, and, you follow me, and you need to be aware of how the church operates. But things like constitutions, translations, polity, music, they need to know up front where you are, and now this is the advice given to me by guys that have tried to do this. If they did it again, this is what they've told me. And they need the liberty to change it day one if they so desire. Day one. Because if you say, well, in a few years, I want to switch to a more modern translation. Okay, the minute you start that, you'll get pushback because you didn't really, you follow me? So all these guys said, if I had to do it over again, we'd do it up front. I'd say this is where my philosophy is, and if you vote on me, then that gives me the liberty. I can change on day one, I probably won't, but I want the congregation to know this is where I'm going. Okay, because I've had pulpit committees say that's fine, and then that's never communicated to the congregation. And all of a sudden you got a split, or you got a guy that moved his family and moved in and everything, and all of a sudden the pulpit committee said one thing, the church wasn't aware of it. Okay, so, but if you say, but I need the liberty, okay, now remember, that's at 8:35 now on Tuesday night, okay, and that's just a gathering, but these are wisdom issues, okay, but I promise you, you go in and immediately, if you don't discuss dress, what your wife's expected to wear, translations, music, where that is on the spectrum, and then polity, you'll end up in trouble, and the church will end up in trouble.
So I'm going to pretend that I didn't hear what Marsh said, and I'll give you my view on it. Okay, I think the man in the church should be very closely aligned on those things, or he should not even go there, and they should not call him. And if the leader, particularly if the leadership is united in wanting change in some of these areas, and they're asking him to come and over time lead them into whatever change would be appropriate, that is one thing. And particularly if that is the attitude of the church in general as well. Churches need change, and to me that change is the most important change, is the change toward Christ likeness. That's the kind of change we need. Not away from that, but toward that. And so now, let's say a man in his mind thinks, okay, I'm going to change this church over time, but he is not forthright about those areas. And then he gets in, they vote him in, he never said much about this or anything. I think it's highly unethical for him to try to bring about change in a clandestine way, coming in a sneaky way. I think it's highly unethical. And if he comes in and he didn't have any plan to do that, but his own viewpoint changes on things that are areas of sensitivity to other people, like music or like doctrine or like whatever, and he changes, my personal opinion is he needs to go somewhere else where he's a good match, but he should not try to bring that church around or split that church over his change of outlook on whatever it is. Am I fair about it? Okay, so it's, I think we're talking about what's agreed on in advance and what's not. So we got to be clear about that. That one irks me to death when people take a church, got a philosophy, it's got a doctrine, and sure, improvements within a spectrum is fine, but real change of direction is not.
Yeah, and let me say one more thing, because so many churches are going a long time without a pastor, and they start feeling there's something wrong with us, and they start getting desperate, and the next guy that comes up that can spell B-I-B-L-E, they call him. I'm serious. I mean, the next guy that says, and he's qualified and ordained, they'll call, and he's not a good fit. So you as pastors, if you know a church is without pastors, help them be patient. Encourage them that the wrong person, you don't want that. So I've seen many churches panic, okay, and rush into it, and just really make and you probably, if I say this, a couple of churches may come to mind. Some churches, I think someone has called it, they're bad pickers, okay? I think that I've heard that phrase. They don't vet, they just don't understand how to call a pastor. And that's where you can help them if you form relationships with churches in the area, or again, a possible interim, or Bruce can help, I can help, you can help, or send Tim to Montana and he can help them. That's an inside joke if you were here.
How can a pastor encourage deacons who are resistant to sharing the teaching load in order to help him out?
All right. Now, again, this gets into, and I'm going to quote Bruce on this. Within the church, I'm more concerned how offices function than what they're called. I don't think I'm a heretic yet, okay? What I mean by that is some churches have trustees, deacons, and pastor. In reality, the trustees are deacons, and the deacons are elders, okay? That's the way they function, okay? But even if you just have deacons, you have some teaching deacons and some non-teaching deacons. All right, and if you don't have someone that wants to share the load, okay, and they don't feel apt to teach, you just pray. Either God send me somebody that is apt to teach, or help one of these guys be open. So the question is, so why don't you want you to teach? A lot of these guys, they're totally qualified, but they don't know how to put it together. And they may need mentoring on how to put it together, or get them some good material to teach this material. Review it. We'll sit down, on Friday lunch and go through it, but just be ready to teach this material. And then they can understand how to develop the material. Yeah, so equip them. That makes sense? And y'all know that. Okay.
This is my question. And when we started with GFA, we would submit monthly church planter reports. And you would gauge how much time I spent studying the Word this month, visitation this month. And we would have to record our activities. And then you gave me the warning. If you are in the study too much, I'm going to call you. If you're not in the study enough, I'm going to call you. So how do we as pastors, how much is too much time in the study? How much is not enough time in the study? How do we balance visitation, this, ministry, administration? So by the time we all hit, we all check out at 40 hours a week and we're done, right? But how do we balance those things, and where is that balance at?
Well, let me first of all say I have no recollection of any conversation with you like that. we did have it's a little bit on the legal side actually. If we are a funding source, we have to have some accountability. But so we would have a report, but I never personally looked at those heavy-handedly. I don't recall ever calling it. Yeah. But church planning is you're trying to plan a church, okay? So it is different than an already established. So you're really trying to be sure a man has adequate study time to preach effectively, but not more importantly, but equally important at least, I would say, he's got to be out meeting people. And I really didn't care how a guy did that, whether it's door to door or some other method that he has. There are a lot of ways to do that. But just be sure that there's an adequate investment, and especially in the early, first year or two, there's really got to be a lot of seed sowing, and you get that very extensively. So, my own opinion, and I think I'm gonna defer to Marsh on study time and the rest of the.
You said you had an opinion.
I have an opinion that if a man's preaching 3 or 4 times a week, I'm not sure church planners are doing that today so much, probably once or twice a week, a lot of them. But I would say that's probably going to take, depending on the man, depending on how long he's been preaching, somewhere like 20 hours a week to prepare those messages. They may feel like it's 30 hours or 40 hours to do that, but they cannot be planning a church studying 30 and 40 hours a week, in my opinion. If they want to do that in 80 hours, I guess that's okay, but Mama's going to not like that, So they've got to get out with people. So I think basically in a regular pastorate, it's probably something in that ballpark, depending on the man, a lot of factors, 15, 20, maybe 25 hours for some men, study, preparation time, and then another 10 to 15 hours a week with people, and the rest of it administration, taking care of the details of ministry.
All right, I like to think of it as a three-legged stool. Okay, I want to do church administration well, so I got time to study. And then after I study well, I want to make sure I do the visiting or the one-on-one work. So those, because it all affects each other. So I know the temperature of our people as I'm preaching. Okay, so I consider those three. You got to be a good administrator in order to make sure you got time to study, and you got to get the studying done to make sure you got time to visit, so people will really listen to what you're saying, right? But personally, in my world, I had to get Sunday morning done in 12 hours. Okay, now I always prepared ahead. I personally like inductive study. I would do that for a book ahead of time and get the number of messages I was going to preach and all that. But I would not put wouldn't put anything on that skeleton until the week I was preaching it, because I believe God brings certain things into your life that week that mold what happens. Okay, but I had a lot of the legwork done in advance, but I had to get that Sunday morning, in my world, done in 12 hours. and then the other I would divide up, between Sunday night and I in counseling I had a limit to 3 cases. I could not do more than 3 counseling cases a week. I couldn't do it, and that's the reason you got to train others. So you got to figure out what that. We all have governors. God has put a governor on us as far as how much we can devote to this and be fresh and be good, and so but I think but the total should be somewhere between 20 and 25. But the question is, don't let Sunday morning take 20 of that 25 hours. So you got to get in and do it while you're fresh, and you know when that is, either it's at 9 or in the morning, and you got to chunk it out then.
Can you quantify the number of work hours in a whole work week?
Yeah, all right, so we did this. We divided our work week into modules, morning, afternoon, evening, okay? And so so we did accountability every week to a deacon in charge of pastoral responsibilities, okay? So we were required I set the rule. We had to take 3 consecutive modules off a week. Okay, what I mean by that would be if you take a Monday, let's say you catch up on work Monday morning. If you take Monday morning and work to catch up to get ahead, then you take Monday afternoon, Monday evening, then you got to take Tuesday morning off. Okay, so there had to be a 24-hour period where you were. I mean, we're still going to check emails, but you know what I mean. Officially, and that was even when our church was very small. I had somebody hold me accountable, and I've forgotten where I came up. I read this. Some church did these modules. It made sense to me. Okay, so you have to regulate, and if I got up to, you need to have at least 15 modules invested. Okay, and if you get up to above much below, you got 3 modules times 7, that's 21. If you start bumping 18 every week, you're going to burn out. And somebody needs to hold you accountable for that. And by the way, I would send in my accountability sheet, and then I would copy my wife in on it. So she would know I was being held accountable by somebody. Because, folks, we love what we do. It's a calling. It's not a job. We're not hirelings. But we still got to govern our lives. If somebody says, well, I hadn't had a vacation in a year, then you're a very poor steward. It's that simple. Because it's a stewardship of the body. Okay? And you have to govern and discipline your body, and then discipline your mind and discipline your heart.
So when you say 50 to 60 hours a week, is that what you
I think any pastor, you're going to put in 50 to 60. Okay, but when you're off, you need to be off. Okay, does that make sense?
All right, last question for the evening. What should I do if I am currently pastoring and I am questioning my call to the ministry?
I need to talk to somebody. Yeah. It is possible that a person can be in the ministry, and once in the rigors of ministry, realize they've made a mistake, and they're actually not called, gifted, well-suited for the ministry. You don't do that on Mondays. You don't make those decisions on Mondays. But it could be some skill issues. It could be there's some skills, or someone has too high of expectations for themselves. It's unrealistic. I have known preachers that have mood swings, serious mood swings. I'll get the phone call in a downswing when they're in a low mood, and once I get to know guys, I realize, okay, what's going on here is it's emotional, it's not actual. So, but I'd get some serious discussion going with someone you really have confidence in, and work through the call to the ministry, work through qualifications. It's possible a guy is not, he knows he's not where he should be on meeting the qualifications. He's wondering if he has disqualified himself. That's a matter of personal counsel.
Yeah, and people are going to call you and ask you that question. And first thing you do, you just want to set aside a season of prayer. You know, and don't, like Bruce said, don't let them make a hasty decision. Okay, that we all know men, maybe not so much recently, but that were mama called. Their mamas wanted in the ministry, or they were preacher called. You're my preacher boy. Now, that's kind of the previous generation. And so they felt the outward pressure, or maybe everybody, again, I got 3 sons. I'm so glad. I mean, my younger son is a lawyer. He's got no business in the ministry. So I'm glad he did not just say, all right, my 2 brothers are pastors, and I should be that too. Okay? So I think we need to make sure that when someone answers the call under your ministry, you go very carefully through that, and the church acknowledges or recognizes the call. But there are seasons of discouragement. I go to Matthew 11, and there is a man in Scripture called John the Baptist who said, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world." And in Matthew 11, he sends his disciples to Christ. Are you the coming one, or do we look for another? That passage baffled me for a long time. But John the Baptist had certain expectations, probably. And where was he? He was in prison. And here is, you know, I mean, and Christ really didn't answer the question. Go study that in Matthew 11. He said, no, just tell, hey, by the way, the lame walk, the blind see. And so the way Christ answered John the Baptist in Matthew 11, because there are seasons of confusion. And if John the Baptist could be confused, we could be confused on our call. So I would say, let's don't do anything hasty, and let's find out what's going on. And maybe you're not. And I know one man that really, that he got called up, 2 or 3 other guys in the church were being called to preach. And it wasn't under my ministry, but it was before I was called to preach. And he said, oh, I need to do this too, because he thought it was just a spiritual thing to do. But we need to understand there are godly businessmen needed, you know, and so we want to make sure somebody really, and if I can talk with my 2 sons, that I try to talk them out of the call. And the other men in our church that wanted to go into, no, I'm going to talk you out of it. I'm going to give you all the reasons you should not do it. And I want you to think about that. But once they are, we're going to love them and support them. You know. Does that make sense? Is that any other input on that? But the call of God is real, and the recognition of the church of God's call on somebody's life is so important. Okay, I think the 2 go hand in hand. The man that desires the office of bishop and the church laying on the hands and recognizing.
And to me, the qualifications. So the call is the anchor. The qualifications are the anchor line. You can't have effective anchor without an anchor line. So those qualifications. You could be called and not qualified. You could be called and disqualified. And you would still have that inner urgency wanting to do it. But God has said, in terms of pastoral ministry, unless you're qualified and stay qualified, you actually can't do it, right? There's a verse that's not a call to the ministry verse, but it says the gifts and callings of God are without repentance. God had a plan. We just got to be careful to stay in the right place where God can carry out his plan through us as he intends by being qualified and staying qualified.